So welcome back to Wings of Refuge. This is my first episode and it's an introduction to my series of this is my first episode and it's an introduction to the series Redemption series. So we are going to go through my story and some friend stories of the redeeming power of God and his faithfulness. So my story is about grief, loss, and suicide, and it's an intimate story, so grab some tea, sit down. It's gonna be a while. So I don't know if you guys have ever taken that leap of faith in moving, whether it's moving from like one part of town to another part of town. Moving is scary, let alone moving alone from Maryland. If you're not familiar with the US, Maryland, which is all the way east, to Denver, Colorado, which is nearly all the way west. So it was quite an adventure, a whole lot of change, but at the same time I was already developing in my relationship with God. So I took this as an adventure where I would be leaning on God and he would be teaching me about him and his goodness. And I was not scared. If anything, I was excited, I was nervous, but I knew that something good was going to come of it. So moving there was my first time moving away from my family. It was my first time living alone. It was my first time buying a new car by myself, which oddly is like very adult. So that was one thing. And it was my first time living by myself in my own apartment. That in itself was something I was really proud of myself for achieving at such a young age. And knowing that I could stand firm in my faith and lean on God in this new chapter by pretty much by myself. I did have a couple family members in the area, but I was pretty much living alone. So you know how it goes when you're moving. So I move into my apartment and I'm ordering furniture. Grown, honey. I'm ordering furniture. I'm ordering like a couch, a bed, and the last thing I had to order was this dresser. So I order my dresser and it comes, no, I order my dresser and the man tells me that that part of my furniture order could not be delivered, but I could go in and pick it up that same day. So I said, no problem. I'm thinking in my head, it's a dresser, it must be broken down in pieces. So I'm gonna, like in a box. So I drive out to pick up the dresser and the dresser is actually in the entire box. Like it's like my height. So I was like, okay, how are we gonna get it in this car? So the man helps me put it in my car, and I'm saying to myself and I'm saying to God, Lord, you and I both know I'm here alone. You and I both know I haven't met anybody in my new apartment. So how is this gonna work? How am I gonna get this dresser into my apartment? But I was like, you know what, God, this is part of our adventure. This is part of the game. This is something I'll tell you about in my prayers tonight, how we got this dresser upstairs. So long story short, the man helps me put the dresser in my car. I drive home, and when I get in the parking lot, I started thinking to myself, I was with one of my girlfriends from church. I met one of my girlfriends from church, Bronwyn. That's my boo. So we bring, we get outside of the apartment, and I say to her, there's no way that you and I are gonna get this dresser through the parking lot, through the stairs, up the elevator, down the hall to my unit. And literally as soon as we finish praying and we ask God to send us someone to help us, this black car pulls up behind my car. And it was this young, fine man. His name was Woody. And he comes out and we wave to him like, hey friend, do you think you could help us move this dresser upstairs? And he's like, no problem, like not an issue. So he comes in, helps us grab this dresser, and at the time I didn't notice he was like attractive per se, but I just kind of looked at him and I was like, okay, like a nice friendly neighbor, like that's good to have. So I noticed that right away. So it was myself, Bronwyn, and Woody. We ended up moving the dresser upstairs, and that's the first day that I met, you know, my new neighbor friend, and we started getting to know each other from there. So in my first couple of weeks moving into this apartment, I'm getting settled in. I noticed that one of the drawers in my kitchen was broken. And this is an entirely brand new unit, a brand new apartment. So I found it very strange. So I walked to the leasing office to address it with the landlord or leasing lady, manager, whatever they're called. So I go talk to her and I'm telling her about this drawer issue that I'm having. And as I'm speaking to her, this girl runs into the room and she disrupts our conversation, but it looks like something must have really been wrong. So I stopped speaking. We let her have a seat. We try to calm her down and she starts screaming, "He did it! He did it!" I'm like, "He did what?" And she's hysterically crying and I'm trying to calm her down. And I'm a nurse, so we I think nurses, I don't know about all nurses, but I think nurses have something in their heart to just help others. I hope so. So I just kind of wrapped her in my arms and I started talking to her, telling her that everything's gonna be okay, but I didn't know what he did meant. So she finally says to our leasing manager that her boyfriend committed suicide on the couch in their apartment. She came home to that. And I was in shock. I have never known anyone at this time who's committed suicide. I felt like in this moment, I'm complaining about a drawer in my apartment. Like, I need to dismiss myself. So I gave her a hug and I told her that I would certainly be praying for her. And at the point where the leasing manager called 911, I excused myself and I left. So that was instance one. And I walked home and I just started saying to God in my heart and in my mind, like, that was strange. But I kind of dismissed it. And later on, you know, I'm still going through life. I start dating the guy from the parking lot, but hey. And I'm getting to know him and I'm falling, you know, deeper and deeper in love with this guy. And he's just an awesome man. That's one part of it. So as the days go by, on November 29th, 2018, my best friend, Carlene, got hit by a car. Thankfully, she survived. And this is an entire redemption series episode in itself, so I'll let her speak for herself. Watch the next episode. So my best friend gets hit by a car, and in that moment, I'm heartbroken, I'm devastated, and I'm wondering, God, how is this possible? Like, I knew bad things happen to people, but I did not for a second think something like that could ever happen to her. And she's all the way in Florida. She's in an ICU. She can only have one guest at a time. So I'm praying and I'm fasting and I'm wondering, God, how can you allow something bad to happen to one of your children? I could not wrap my mind around it. So I start walking in that journey of prayer for my friend, fasting for her, and just having conversations about life with God. So as the weeks are progressing, this was around November at this point. So now we're jumping into January. So I'm a newer nurse and I come into work one day and my manager says to me, "Hey, can you grab a body bag and put it in OR7? I'm thinking, a body bag? But I'm a surgical nurse, so I'm thinking, why are we starting a surgery with a body bag? I found it strange. So I grabbed the body bag, I set it up in the room, and I get my assignment for the day. And it's an organ procurement for a 17-year-old boy. He attempted suicide by strangulation. I don't know if that's too TMI for you guys, but that's what he did. And I struggled with that. I really struggled with that case. We thankfully were able to send his heart to a little 4-year-old girl in Washington State. We were able to send his lungs to another child in the state. A lot of his organs were able to go and help so many children. But when I went home that night, I sobbed. Like, even talking about it right now is difficult because during the case, this is so weird. I don't even know why I'm starting right now. But anyway, so during the case, I called my aunt, whom I'm really close to, and I told her how much I was struggling to have a child come into the room physically alive and then know that he's going to be gone within an hour of that case. I ended up going home from work early that day, just kind of processing what this, sorry. So I'm having a hard time processing what's happened with this kid. So I call Woody. He lives upstairs from me at this point. We're dating pretty regularly. And I tell him about this kid that committed suicide, and we talked about it and we prayed about it, and we just discussed suicide and loss in this life. And I was rattled by it at this point, hearing that girl tell me about the boyfriend she had commit suicide, and then my friend Carlene getting hit by this car, nearly dying. And now I have this 17-year-old kid on my table getting his organs sent out. So I just started asking God at this point questions about life and about like what is life? How are we alive when we are mentally cognizant? Is our body alive? Like, I just could not wrap my mind around it. So this is around January. I'm just kind of asking God about life and death. So in February, I come into work and I get a trauma right when I get to work. And I'm like, oh, it's barely 7 a.m. How we got a trauma already? So it turned out to be another child. Mind you, I am not a pediatric nurse. I'm an adult nurse. I think it takes a special heart to be a nurse for children. To see a child struggle and to have that grace to be loving for them. It takes a very special person. I don't think I'm strong enough. So we had a 13-year-old girl get hit by a car. Was it a car or a bus? I don't remember specifically what it was, but the children's hospital was miles away, but she got hit within blocks of our hospital, so they sent her to us. So I am fighting for her. We stabilize her and we fly her out to the children's hospital. Ultimately, she does not survive. And again, weeks later, I start struggling with this, and I bring it back to God. I'm like, what is happening? For some reason, again, this young girl, it hit my heart. And her mother was so gracious in inviting the members of our hospital and the children's hospital to the funeral. So I went to her funeral and I sat all the way in the back and I watched as her friends that are 12 and 13 and 14, and they're grieving this child that's gone. And it was beautiful in that her family, they were believers. So we worshiped and we prayed and we played her favorite music, and it was a beautiful homegoing. And her mother stood and spoke about the gospel, and I walked away from that thinking, okay, God, I think what you're trying to teach me is that life is precious and we are called to be worshipers and lovers of God. So I walked away from this funeral thinking, lesson learned. It was literally just starting. So this was in February. This young girl died, and I chose to go by myself, and I went home and I told Woody all about this funeral that I went to, and I felt like I was learning my lesson. My friend Carlene was getting better, and I thought it was just a season. So fast forward to March. So it was on March 11th, 2019. Colorado is 2 hours back from Maryland time. So I get up for work like normal, and for some reason that morning when I woke up, it's weird to say, like, but the sky felt like warped. But I was like, I'm definitely tripping. I'm definitely tripping. So I let it go. And I get to work, and for some reason when I'm at work, I'm dropping instruments, I'm dropping trays, and I'm like, can I get a backup nurse in my room? Because I'm just feeling like something is off. So I got another nurse that came into the room with me, and she was just helping me out throughout the day. But throughout the day, I just felt like something was off. So a little bit later into my shift, which would be a couple hours further into Maryland time, I get a call from my cousin who never calls me, and then I get a call from my uncle who never calls me. So I listened to the voicemail, and my cousin said, have I spoken with my mom? And I'm thinking, something is going on with my mom. I gotta go right now. So I step out, I go outside, and I call my cousin, and he's like, you should call my dad. So I call my uncle, And my uncle was like, you know, something's happened with your dad. And I'm thinking, you know what, I'm a nurse, I can handle it. Is it a heart attack? Is it a stroke? You know, what could it possibly be? Like, I can handle it, give it to me straight. And he's like, I'll call you back. Okay. So then I call again, they hang up. I call my mom. My mom's like, there's been an accident with your dad. I'm like, a car accident? That man drives the best. So I found that strange. So I make 4 or 5 phone calls back and forth, and at this point I'm confused. So of course I turn around and I look at God, you know, theoretically I look towards God and I'm like, what's going on? So I get back on the phone and this officer picks up and he says to me, I'm at your father's house, and I'm, you know, at this time it's maybe 4 o'clock my time in Denver, so it was like around 6 p.m. Maryland time. So he tells me how he's at my dad's house and they found him unresponsive and he's gone, he's dead. I sat there and I was like, I don't think I heard that right. So I ignored him because I know for sure I didn't hear that right. So I walk to the locker room to tell my manager, I think my dad's dead, which is such a strange thing to think. It's a strange thing to process, but I was like, nah. But then it just started to hit me like this might be true. So I call my uncle again and he confirms it. And I don't really have a memory of what happened from there, but I remember laying on the ground in the locker room, and one of our cleaning staff, her name was Islanda. I remember her holding me and praying for me, and I remember my manager driving me to my apartment because she didn't want me to drive. And everything from there just, it went pretty quickly in terms of I was on a flight within 12 hours of finding that out. And it was just, I don't know how else to describe it except dark. Like, it feels like you're like a walking, moving zombie. Like, if you've never experienced loss, you think that when somebody dies, like they die and then you show up at a funeral. No, like the family in the midst of that grief and that shock is planning a funeral, and it's like you're a moving, functioning zombie. Like, I don't know how to explain it, but it was a very tough time. So I really struggled with asking God how he could allow my father to die at home alone. My dad was a very punctual person. Like, he taught me to wear my watch. He taught me to read the time. So the fact that this man didn't make it to work was alarming, and it showed me why that morning I felt so warped. And it was hours before my uncle went to check on him, and you know, the fact that his car was there, he wasn't answering the phone, the door was locked. I think the police had to break into his house to, you know, find him there alone. And I think that that's what bothered me the most in losing my father, was that he died alone. And our last conversation, I rushed him off the phone, and that ate at me a lot. But that's a conversation for the next video. So on March 23rd and 24th, we had a viewing for my dad, and we had the we had the viewing and we had the burial. And I don't think I realized the impact of closing a casket on somebody that you love and putting them in the ground. I remember, like, it's such a strange way to think. It's weird what like grief will bring you through, but I remember thinking, like, I don't want to eat or drink anything if my dad can't eat or drink anything. Which obviously, like, you know that he's gone, and like but I didn't want to eat or drink anything because I couldn't bear the thought of like my dad being boxed up and not being able to eat or drink anything. That was very difficult. And so I came back from Maryland and started getting settled in, and Woody and I start spending even more time together during these last few days and after the funeral. And we decided we wanted to take a getaway trip together before I go back to work, to kind of, you know, just for morale. So we go to Boulder and we just had a beautiful time. Although I was in a dark place, I felt like God was really blessing me with someone that I could really lean on. So things are getting okay. We're still processing and went through the reality of when someone dies, waiting for their death certificate. It's a lot. It's a lot of work when somebody dies. So that Monday, April 1st, Woody and I decided to go to church that evening. I was still off work and he went to work that day. Got back home, and when we got back home, we went up to my apartment at this point after Bible study. It's like 10-11 p.m. and he asked to spend the night with me, and I felt like we had just survived without sin a weekend away together a few days prior. So I said to him, I don't think that you should spend the night, and because he just lived upstairs from me. I don't think you should spend the night, and I think that it's best if I have this night to sleep alone because I am still grieving. So he still insisted that he wanted to stay. So I said to him, you can stay on my couch. So he laid on my couch. I grabbed a blanket and I covered him with a blanket, and I went to my room and I texted him from my room. And at that point, he seemed a little bit off. So I come out of my room and I jokingly jump on him to kind of lighten the mood. And he didn't react. And I thought, how strange. And then he said to me he would rather sleep upstairs on his bed. And I didn't find that strange in the moment. But something about him switched from us being a light in the church and us worshiping in the car. And it was like in a split second, he just was not in a good mood anymore. And I'd never seen him do that. But he was under some stress from work. So I opened up the door and I let him go upstairs to his unit. And I didn't think anything of it. But I sensed that something was wrong. So I called him and I said, I don't know what's going on with you. But I'm here for you. So I started texting him prayers. I stayed on the phone with him, and despite my texts and despite my support, he still seemed like he was just not in a good mood. And at this point, it's midnight, 1 a.m. So I stayed on FaceTime with him, and I think at some point either I fell asleep or my phone died, and I have no idea what came first. So that morning, at this point it's Tuesday, April 2nd, I wake up really early. I'm a morning person. So I wake up around 6:30 or 7. Yeah. So I hook my phone up and it's maybe 8:30 Maryland time. So I'm getting all these texts from, the day, from the morning, I guess, that I might have missed when my phone died. So every morning, like clockwork, when I get up, I just look over at my phone and I open the blinds. So I open the blinds like I normally do, and I see Woody's car outside, and I'm thinking, he's late for work. Okay. And I'm going through my messages and I see my sister texted me per usual, my aunt texted me per usual, and I see that Woody texted me and he said, "This is not your fault. Tell my family that I love them." I've never gotten a message like that before. So I called my sister and I said, "I've never seen a message like this." Okay. So I make my way upstairs to his apartment. It was just one floor up. And I knock on the door and there's no response. And I open the door and I was thinking to myself, I don't want to be one of those nagging girls, especially at 6:30 in the morning, telling him that he's late for work and his door's open. How dare you? So I open the door and nothing. And I walk into the unit and nothing. And I get into his kitchen and I'm calling his name. Nothing. So in my heart, I walk into the kitchen and something, God, says to me, I don't want you to walk past this kitchen. I have never heard anything clearer than I did in that moment. Don't walk past this kitchen. At this point, my heart is like sinking. Like, what is going on? So I leave the unit and I call my aunt and I'm like, I don't know what's going on. And she's probably thinking I sound crazy. So I hang up and I call 911 and I say, I think something's wrong. Like, he sent me this message and I don't think I'd ever called 911, maybe for a car accident or something. So at this point, I'm a little bit embarrassed that I'm calling 911 and I'm thinking to myself, like, if he's home and he's sleeping, he's gonna be so upset with me that I have the police at his door. So I'm embarrassed. They come in, I have these ugly sweatpants on and this ugly t-shirt, and I'm thinking, it's barely 7:30 in the morning and I look ridiculous. So what felt like hours was probably 10 minutes, and the police came up. It was 2 of them, and I lead them upstairs and I tell them what's happened, and they ask me, is there a weapon in the house? I'm like, why are you asking me that? And I think to myself, I remember when I first hung out with him, he had a gun in his house, and I told him I am terrified of guns. I never want to see it, and he made me a promise that I would never see it. So I never saw it again. And I think maybe one other time when we went hiking through like a very wooded area, I know he brought it, but he never let me see it. To this day, I just think guns are scary for me. The sound, all of it. So the officer asked me, is there a weapon in the house? I'm like, yeah. But in my brain, I'm not even thinking for a second what that has to do with anything. So the police go into his apartment and I go like maybe 12 feet, 15 feet down the hall, and I just sit on the ground and wait for them. So the police are in there and I'm like just sitting on the phone with my aunt, like, I can't believe I called the police. And then I see EMTs come up and I'm thinking, oh, okay, like something definitely happened, but they're gonna help him. So the EMTs come up and I'm sitting on the ground. And it's like they went in and then they came back out. And I was like, aren't you supposed to like grab a stretcher? So, sorry. So at that point, my brain's not even for a second thinking something's happened to him. I'm still thinking, this is a very strange morning. So I'm on the phone with my aunt and she's just kind of on standby for whatever is about to happen. And I'm down the hall, so I start hearing the sound of tape. And I've watched enough Law and Order to know that tape is a crime scene sound. And I'm like, nah. So the lady, there was a crisis manager that came. Oh, baby. So there was a crisis manager that was there. She came, and I'm sitting on the ground, so she crawls down to me and she says, Woody is no more. And I'm looking at her like, huh? And I was like, what? And she said, and she just shook her head. And it just like, it just resonated in my mind that the gun, the tape, the EMTs like leaving, like it just clicked. And at this point, I buried my dad on the 24th and it's April 2nd. So it's about, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 days since I buried my dad, and now he's dead. I couldn't even get it through my mind. So I go down the elevator to my unit and I just sit there. And like 5 minutes later, the police come and they check my messages to him and they check his phone, and from there again it kind of becomes like more of a blur, and I tell my aunt what's happened and it's just unbelievable. But on that morning, he texted me at 4:51 a.m. and he said, "Tell my family I love them. This is not your fault." And I think to myself, what would have happened if I had not chosen to sleep alone, or if I would have insisted that he stayed, or if I would have not fallen asleep and gone up sooner. There are a lot of what ifs and regrets, and that good night was so quick. It wasn't passionate, it wasn't loving, it wasn't anything. It was just like, oh, okay, good night, I'll see you tomorrow. And it was crazy because that Tuesday, April 2nd, we had made plans to, when he gets off work, for us to go visit a couple from our church in the hospital, and he was going to teach me how to do an oil change on my own car. So we had made plans for that day. And to this day, I have no idea what happened in that after Bible study to 5 a.m. No idea. But I know that I'm the last person that he texted and the only person that he let know that something was about to happen. Later that day, I realized like I didn't want to be in our apartment and see them use a stretcher to wheel his body out. I knew that I wouldn't survive that. And I think God knew when he showed me not to go past the kitchen into his bedroom. I could have seen his body. And I don't think for me I would have survived that mentally. I really struggle with this one in the sense that I feel a sense of responsibility, or felt, past tense. I felt a sense of responsibility for his death. I had never personally, experienced loss due to suicide, let alone someone that like you really love. And I felt very much betrayed by God. I felt abandoned by God. I felt a plethora. I felt anger, a plethora of things, which we'll get into in another video. But ultimately, so my father passed March 11th. We buried my father March 24th. Woody died April 2nd. And as crazy as that already was, on April 7th, a boyfriend that I had when I was 17, that's its own story time. When I was 17 until I was around 20 or 21, he was murdered 5 days after Woody died. And I felt like the world was just spinning. Like my life was just spinning, and it's like I don't know how to explain it. Like it was like one hit after the other after the other. And then 5 days after that, just when I am starting to think I'm okay, on April 12th, I get in this crazy car accident. A whole different story. But I'm looking at God like, on March 1st, my whole life was a beautiful, I'm figuring it out, I'm okay, normal, 23, 24-year-old girl. I think 24. Maybe 25, I don't remember. But it was insane to me how on March 1st, my life could be this normal, peaceful, mundane event. And in a matter of 3 weeks, I could lose my dad, my ex, the guy I'm dating, getting a horrible car accident. And obviously, seeing as Woody and I lived in the same building, I could not fathom living there anymore. So I'm having to break my lease. I'm having to move back across the country. Like my family's in Maryland, so it made more sense for me to come home to them. I had never experienced anything like this, and it was traumatizing for me. And it is unbelievable to think that it'll be 2 years, and this has been the most difficult 2 years I've ever lived through. But it has built my faith in God on a foundation that I know no one can ever take from me again. And I guess what I'm getting at here is that God is real. God is good. And I know it's weird to say that after just talking about all of these horrible things. And I think sometimes when you hear stories like this, like, it helps the image of it when it looks like, oh, I went through this horrible thing, but now I have a baby. I went through this horrible thing, but now I have a husband. I went through this horrible thing, but now I have my faith in God, and I know that it's true. I know that it's real. I will definitely do a part 2 of this video about overcoming grief, overcoming loss, the guilt. If I feel like it's the guilt that comes alongside losing someone to suicide is unfathomable. So I'm happy to do a video if you guys are interested in a part 2 about this, and just seeing God's hand in this, because this was just the story, but I definitely think I need a God's hand in this part 2 video, because he's so faithful. Like, by no means am I saying that I felt him every day, that I could just snuggle up to him. There was none of that. Like, there were some days where I'm like, are you real? Like, there's a lot of days like that. But I want to just end every episode of this series asking these 3 questions to everybody. So what this has taught me about God in terms of redemption is that God has promised to never leave or forsake us. And in my situation, I can faithfully say that God never left me and God never forsaked me. Even when it felt that way, I can wholeheartedly look at the situation and just see his hand. This experience has taught me the hope of the gospel, to lean on the gospel, to lean on the truth of God. What I want my testimony or my experience to teach others is that God is good. He's good whether you're in the darkest moments, whether you're in the brightest moments. The gospel is real. Jesus is real, and he loves you. And I think that sometimes, I don't know about you, but I know for me, sometimes when I think about love or God loving me, I used to think that meant that he would prevent any harm from coming to me. When truly, someone that loves you walks through with you. Someone that loves you sits in the fire with you. So my hope is that you'll see how faithful God is. How has this changed or challenged your faith? It completely changed my faith. It made me, I think stronger in my faith. I think it challenged my faith in that it's changed my perspective of who God is. And like, I really leaned on, like, this God has plans to prosper and never to harm you. Like, I was very much sipping that prosperity gospel tea so hard that it was unfathomable that bad things could happen. But yeah, intense video, difficult story. I'm so glad I shared this with you guys. I didn't think that I had the strength to do it, but God really gave me the grace today, and I feel like a weight is all off of my shoulder. Like, you know, like the Bible says, they overcome by the word of their testimony. I feel like I'm experiencing that right now. Like, I feel so free, and I'm happy to be able to share this with you guys. I'm happy to be able to, in part 2, teach you guys about suffering and loss. And granted, there are people that go through significant loss and grief, losing their entire families. There are great deep extremes. This is just my experience, and I pray that it can help you in any capacity. If you guys can like, comment, subscribe, put your prayer requests down below. Let's create a little Wings of Refuge family. I am happy to answer your questions, to pray with you guys. So this is episode 1, and there are many more episodes of God's redeeming faithfulness to come. Bye guys. Tell him